Okay, comrades, I got the go-ahead from the organizing team. So, second time lucky, and I feel much more relaxed now, so let's go again. And apologies for the people in the room who heard this already for the trial, but those of us joining on YouTube, this is your first. So on behalf of the Socialist Party, I want to welcome you all to this rally, part of this year's Socialism event, a weekend of discussion and debate on socialist ideas to change the world. My name is Oisin, and I'm the National Treasurer of the Socialist Party, and I'm honored to be chairing the rally tonight. And after nearly 2 years, it's great to be in the room with fellow socialist activists and trade unionists. There's hundreds of you here. I can't count you all, but it's great to see you all. And I want to also welcome all those who are watching on YouTube. And sorry that you can't be joining us in the room, but we hope you enjoy the rally. And this rally is being streamed online on YouTube. And for those of you watching, take a minute to share the link on social media and on WhatsApp group to help spread the socialist ideas being discussed here tonight, far and wide. Now, if you do that for a minute. So then, tonight's, the theme of this year's rally is Our Future at Stake. What now for the struggle for socialism? And in a world full of chaos, confusion, and misery, socialist ideas offer us an alternative. For years, the capitalist class has been telling us that we are all in this together, that we have to put up with the terrible condition to save their system. But things are changing. It is not an accident that thousands of working class and young people are drawing the conclusion that this system is not for us. In the pages of The Socialist, our paper, week after week, we are reporting on the many struggles and fight back against the exploitation and oppression that is taking place on a global scale. Never have socialist ideas been so important, and this rally tonight will put forward those ideas. And like in previous socialism, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. Now, our first speaker is a socialist and a climate campaigner. Now, 2 weeks ago, on the 5th and 6th of November, we saw protests taking place in Britain and internationally, demanding action to tackle the climate change. In Glasgow, we saw the largest political mobilization in recent times. On Friday, more than 20,000, mainly young, including students, took to the streets. The next day, 70,000 were on the streets of Glasgow. Now, Oisin Duncan has been on both of those protests with the Socialist Party Scotland arguing for socialist ideas. So, Oisin?
Thanks very much to Isai for that very kind introduction. Thanks very much to the Socialist Party of England and Wales for inviting me to speak and for helping out my party, Socialist Party Scotland, in our intervention into the COP26 demonstrations 2 weeks ago, and the strikes as well, I should say, that were a factor as well. I bring full solidarity from the comrades in our section, and greetings to all the comrades here in person and watching on YouTube. I'm very honoured to be here, hopefully to give some kind of insight into those big marches on the 5th and 6th of November up in Glasgow. So with COP26 taking place at the SEC, a big fancy conference centre on the banks of the River Clyde, the boss's lobbyists and their political lackeys were discussing the measures that they can take to save their system from the climate catastrophe of their own making. At the same time, thousands of demonstrators were preparing for the largest protests in Glasgow since the COVID pandemic began. Despite the pressing nature of the climate developments reported by the IPCC and other scientific panels, the COP conference has achieved little of note. This was not lost on the marchers that we interacted with. Across the board, school students, their parents, young workers and activists of all stripes saw no illusions in the conference to deliver the radical change our society needs to stop the destruction of our environment. Some individual politicians may retain some credibility among those radicalised by the climate, despite the previous broken promises. However, if they cannot confront the capitalist class, which played a central part in causing and continuing climate destruction, they will end up repeating the same mistakes of the Paris, Kyoto, and Rio agreements. The climate marchers in Glasgow were well aware of the failed initiatives of the past. Greta Thunberg's blah 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 line is now posted all around Glasgow city centre. Despite many abstract calls for systemic change, an understanding of why the capitalist system stands in our way is not yet widespread, nor is a call for a socialist response to the climate crisis. That is why we campaign with our slogans for a working class movement demanding socialist change to end climate change, in order to give a political lead to these emergent anti-COP and anti-capitalist moods among many on the demonstrations. Our stalls were popular across both days, and despite a standard Glaswegian downpour on the Saturday, our loudspeakers attracted wide layers of young people ready to discuss the necessity of breaking with capitalism and fighting for a socialist society. Our slogans and leaflets put forward a full radical socialist programme, which includes nationalising the big polluters and retraining the workers in those sectors for redeployment in low-carbon production. Ultimately, we can't control what we don't own, and for a workers' transition, we need workers' ownership and democratic management, not more profit-driven mayhem. This clear message, along with the disciplined and active approach of our comrades, led to a very successful intervention. We sold hundreds of copies of our newspaper and raised over £700, I wish it was £7,000, £700 for our fighting fund. Not only that, but we've already recruited some new members off the back of that very good work. But it wasn't just the marches that we focused on. That movement draws together everybody from Quakers to communists, so it's not the only facet of our work over the last 2 weeks. A decade and a half of cuts to Glasgow City Council's budget has stolen £500 million from the coffers of Scotland's biggest city, and just as austerity has ravaged public services across the UK. So cleansing workers in the GMB decided to take COP26 as an opportunity to fight back against the atrocious pay and conditions imposed by the SNP-led Glasgow Council, taking strike action over the first 8 days of the conference. And we went out to almost every single picket line, discussed with those out in strike, and witnessed them only narrowly vote to end the industrial action after a new set of concessions were won from the council leader, Susan Aiken. That activity reflects our confidence in our programme, and in particular, the demand for joint action by the labour and climate movements, mobilising both the young people radicalised by the climate crisis and the working class as a whole. More importantly, it demonstrates that we have confidence in the working class to change society, and what the COP26 protests showed more than anything is that whole sections of society desperately want to see just that kind of radical change. So if you're in the room and that describes you, and you haven't joined the fight already, then get on board, campaign alongside us, and help transform society along socialist lines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oisin. The environmental crisis ultimately caused by the capitalist greed is one of the clear examples of how this capitalist system offers no future for the humanity. Our next speaker is going to talk about what is needed to tackle the climate crisis from a Marxist perspective. Judy Beishon is on the Socialist Party Executive Committee and the International Secretariat for the Committee for a Workers' International that the Socialist Party is affiliated to. Judy?
Thanks, Isai. Well, COP26 ended in expected failure, as Oisin has said. Yet, we've seen how many commentators and government representatives have tried to put a gloss on it. But the scientists' verdict is that nowhere near enough was agreed to limit global warming to the necessary 1.5 degrees. One journalist wrote that the argument at Glasgow was firmly won in favour of 1.5 degrees and added that in itself was an achievement for the UK hosts and much better for the planet. Well, what a pitiful straw to clutch at. Winning that argument didn't lead to the necessary action for stopping climate change. Only small, inadequate steps were agreed, like on forest deforestation, methane, coal use, and so on. And every government knows that they won't even have to fully deliver on those, as there's no means of real international accountability on the promises made and set. Now, just for a moment, forget the acronym COP, which those 3 letters that we all struggle to remember what they mean anyway, and focus instead on those 2 numbers that follow it, the 26. Well, that stands for 26 summits of world leaders since 1995. They talk every year, and every year, apart from a couple of temporary blips, we've seen that greenhouse gas emissions have increased. So they keep moving the goalposts, now to next year's summit in Egypt. And it's even painted as a success that countries will be asked to revisit their pledges at that next event. Yet this is while virtually every government has said that they've already gone as far as they can and they won't shift any further. We, as socialists, condemn those capitalist governments. We have no illusions, we call for no illusions in any of them, and their environmental posturing. None of their responses to the climate crisis will solve this crisis, whether it's tinkering with carbon taxes, carbon markets, appeals to individual behaviour, declaring climate emergencies like 74% of UK councils have done, in fact, or their much too limited green investments. During the Glasgow events, especially heartrending was the attention drawn to the plight of some of the poorest countries of the world and also some of the most low-lying countries that face obliteration as sea levels rise. But many of their spokespeople posed it as a moral issue. For example, the Prime Minister of Barbados called the lack of help for the most vulnerable people and countries the path of greed and selfishness and immoral and unjust. Well, it's all of those, yes, but trying to put moral pressure on the leaders of countries that have created most of the emissions or are doing so today will be words alone, because the immoral attitudes that are described in those cases have always been typical of capitalists and imperialists. Over centuries, of course, they've pillaged the world for raw materials, for labour. They've expanded their markets with no shortage of brutality and callousness. And we can see today from the way that climate refugees today are already shut out of country after country what the reaction of the capitalist governments is going to be to the something like 200 million refugees that are expected to be fleeing from extreme weather situations over the next few decades. Now, linked to these issues, the mainstream media also kept framing COP26 as a battle between rich nations and poor nations. But the rich-poor battle is in reality one between the world's billionaires, especially those who own and control the banks and the major corporations, and ordinary people who, of course, make up the overwhelming majority in every country of the world. In most of the economically developed countries, as well as those that aren't, we see how workers' wages are being held down, how the public sectors have been bled dry and plunged into massive debt. And I think, that's, as everyone in this audience knows that very well. Another deceptive narrative surrounding the summit has been that the solution lies in the hands of individuals, of influential individuals, or more usually, it's posed as well as a nationalist blame game. It's basically being played against certain governments and certain government leaders. For example, last Monday, in fact it was, there was an editorial in The Guardian which could only wait till the end of the second sentence before leaping to blame the governments of Australia, Brazil, Russia and Saudi Arabia for obstructing the progress at COP26. Well, don't get me wrong, we as socialists condemn all of those governments, but we condemn every capitalist government, including our own, because, of course, while it's clear that some governments are more outrageously overt in protecting the interests of their worst big business polluters than others are, all the capitalist powers are doing it. And that editorial was just echoing their use of nationalism to try to bolster their own positions. Nowadays, they all claim to be green, and there are plenty of capitalists and their representatives in government who give similar warnings on the environment as environmental activists do about the future. Some of the super rich, of course, are affected directly by global warming themselves. Others are giving warnings out of fear that lack of action on the climate is going to propel more young people in the direction of revolutionary conclusions. But the fact is that they're all tied to a system that can't provide the necessary change due to its inbuilt workings, due to the drive for capital accumulation based on exploitation of workers and natural resources, and the fact that the amount of international cooperation that's needed isn't possible because the big corporations are based in nation states and rely on those states to promote their interests to better compete with each other, and all in a chaotic manner. These factors set major limits on what they'll do on the environment, because the very large resources that are necessary for a genuinely green transition would eat into their profits and their ability to compete on the world stage. So no surprise then that the COP26 final declaration was so weak on phasing down coal and didn't include, in fact, on coal, the US, China and India in that pledge, and also didn't make any similar promise at all when it came to oil and gas. Far more money is being ploughed into fossil fuels than into renewables. Yes, because of the vested interests of the fossil fuel industry, but also because nowhere near enough money and resources is put into the necessary research and new technology that's needed to be able to convert all fuel uses in industry and society to be able to use renewable forms. That would require removing the profit motive. In other words, it requires taking the top corporations into public ownership, including the energy firms, transport, finance, and agribusiness. As well as enabling resources to be put where they're needed, that would make it possible to have democratically decided socialist planning at all levels of society, whether regionally, locally, nationally, or internationally. Now, just to quickly complete the damning picture of the inability of capitalism to provide a solution, I also need to just bring in that because it's a system in decay, in long-term decline, that means that there's an increasingly short-term outlook by those who own and control the major corporations. We see how across the globe there's higher debt levels, there's lower growth prospects, there's regular economic crises, they can't escape them. And that long-term decline means greater division, greater tensions, such as we see with the present attempts by the Western powers to curb China's economy. So it's the opposite of the cooperation that's needed to counter climate change. Where in the world today does the ruling layer see a prospect of providing a decent and environmentally sustainable future for the next generations of humanity? Nowhere, they don't. So while we saw in the COVID pandemic, they felt forced to spend massive sums, very large sums of money, ploughing them into economies in order to literally save the economies, they in reality view it as beyond the system's capabilities to invest the even greater sums that are needed to stop and reverse climate change. Now, looking at this whole picture, it's hard to bear in mind that capitalism once had a progressive side to it. But by developing mass production, it laid the basis for the next form of society, which is socialism, a society, a system in which everybody across the entire planet, and I stress that point, everybody on the planet will be able to have their basic needs satisfied and be able to develop their interests and talents as well, all on a sustainable basis. The technology already exists or can be developed to do this. We regularly get glimpses of exciting possible technological developments which capitalism can't fully develop and utilise, but socialism will be able to. The necessary massive changes to industry, to agriculture, to transport that are needed are all possible in societies that would be based on people's needs and environmental sustainability rather than the enrichment of ruling elites. So yes, system change is essential, and many young people mean by system change an end to capitalism, but also those words have been much used as a term of evasion from certain quarters to suggest that system change can be within capitalism instead of removing capitalism. Likewise with the Green New Deals. Socialists support much of what's proposed in them. We're for immediate measures to improve public transport, home insulation, green energy, and so on, and for those to be delivered through a massive increase in skilled, secure jobs on decent pay. But we'll also argue that only a bold programme of socialist change will be able to end environmental destruction. Now, just before I end, I'll just say that others in this rally are going to speak about how working class-led political forces can be built to lead the fight for that programme, which will, of course, that programme will mean linking the issue of the environment with all the other issues that workers have to fight on. But I'll just end, my last point is just going to be on the question of how long will it take to transform society, because obviously in relation to climate change, this is a question on many people's minds. Last week, the journalist George Monbiot was trying to counter despair following the end result of COP26. And he wrote, "Just as the complex natural systems on which our lives depend can flip suddenly from one state to another, so can the systems that humans have created. Like natural systems, if they are driven past their tipping points, they can flip with astonishing speed." Now, he didn't go on in that article to understand how a force will be created to deliver that flip, nor that the new system will need to be socialism. But he was right on the issue of the possible speed, because all the factors are accumulating for a very rapid building of working class-led organisations with socialist programmes. And also we can add for the conditions are developing for a very rapid spreading of them internationally, given the rottenness of capitalism everywhere in the world. So that would be the basis for definitely laying the path for securing, sooner than it might seem today, a totally transformed future for humanity, and I'll add, on a saved and beautiful planet. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. Now, protests against climate change are only one of the many struggles that are currently taking place. There has been a sea of disputes and strikes, with workers fighting for their safety at workplace, fighting for a pay increase and for better terms and conditions. Workers, when faced with an attack, get organised collectively and fight back. Over the last 4 consecutive years, the trade union membership have been increasing. There are now 6.7 million workers in trade union. They are by far the largest organisation in Britain with enormous potential power, a glimpse of which we saw when the teachers' union pushed back against the opening of unsafe schools, or more recently, in Liverpool, the tank drivers won a 17% pay increase. Our next speaker is from NIPSA, the largest public sector union in Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland's General Secretary, Carmel Gates. Unfortunately, she hasn't been able to join us in person, but is sending us a video greeting, which Theo is going to play now.
Now, I have to say, when I was elected, I was a bit obviously dubious about how things might go, but I am, buoyed by the success of others across Britain. I mean, Sharon Graham's election in Unite, the success of Comrades in Unison, and I have to say the wonderful work that Comrades are doing through the NSSN gives me the knowledge that I'm not alone in the struggle, and that I do believe that we can work together in a coalition of the willing to really take on this horrible, corrupt, awful Tory government. Because I think it's, we need to, we have to, as workers, we have to fight, we have to struggle, and we have to do what we can. And I think that, probably now more than, for many years, I feel the confidence that we can do that. I think workers have had enough. And I think that they are willing to fight. And I hope that my election, Sharon's election, the success of other comrades is an example that is the case. And more particularly that young workers are now saying they need to struggle. Can I just finish by saying, in NIPSA, we've been active for many years. But I'm really proud of the fact of the changes that we've been able to make to the object of our union. And I think it's probably rare to say that in our objects we have the call for a socialist economy, and also for cross-community working class trade unionism and sectarian trade unionism. And I think that those things have held us in good stead through many, many years, with the support of, as I said, of comrades in England, Wales and elsewhere. And I think they'll stand us in good stead in the future. So I'm confident that we can help to change society here and to change the world.
That was Carmel Gates. Next, we're going to be hearing from Unite the Union General Secretary. Now, the Socialist Party supported Sharon Graham for the General Secretary election. And Unite is a very important union in Britain, one that is currently involved in over 50 disputes. And as we said in the leaflet that we distributed to workplaces across the country on the election results, on the General Secretary election results, we said that Sharon Graham's stunning victory opens up new opportunity to resist the bosses and the Tory offence and challenge the Starmer's New Labour. Sharon Graham was also joining us through a video.
Thank you. As I stand with workers, my members in dispute this week and every week, I'm speaking at as many platforms as possible to shine a light on what is happening to workers and their communities right now. How workers and communities are yet again lined up to pay the price for the pandemic. A rerun of the 2008 crash, where we saw workers and communities decimated. We as a movement must not allow this to happen. We must step up to the plate. It is what unions are for. It's only been a couple of months since I was elected to be the General Secretary of Unite. And in that time, we've began the change needed to better defend jobs, pay and conditions. Unite is involved in more industrial disputes than at any time in our history. We have stood with striking workers rather than party leaders. We have brought reps together across industries like road haulage to build practical plans to push back on suppression of pay. We've got our lawyers to fight all cases for Unite shop stewards, defending our reps so they can defend our members. And we have built a disputes unit that will triple in size over the coming months to provide concrete action and support. But it is also true that in my short time at the helm, the scale of the crisis facing workers and the trade union movement and the wider left has become ever clearer. The movement is in a critical place. The flame flickers, but we cannot escape the reality. Unions are simply not present in every workplace, and that plays into the hands of employers. Moving outside of the workplace, too many remain wedded to a political project that has no realistic roadmap for revival. Speaking plainly, it is time to face facts. There is no organic surge to build serious grassroots unions, and there is no politician coming over the hill to save us. We simply must do this ourselves. We are the vanguard. We are what stands between the bad boss and the worker, between the new austerity and communities. We must build, we must mobilise, we must drive the change so that workers and communities are treated with the respect they deserve. It is important for us to remember too that the left is more than just Parliament. It's more than the leadership of one party. To working people, it can look like we've forgotten that there was a time before Corbyn, forgotten that the parliamentary road has its limits, that state power is important, but that in a global world facing climate catastrophe, it's widely insufficient. Times have changed, and we need to recognise that power winds along a myriad of paths within a global economic system. The state, the local, they all have a critical place, but so does the workplace, so does the international, and so do the working class. The central questions remain. What are we trying to achieve? What are we facing? And what do we need to do to make the change? What I want to offer is the opportunity to reflect, to define a new strategy that matches the challenges we now face. Mass automation of jobs, new ways of austerity, emboldened mega employers, global climate catastrophe. So where do we start? As trade unions, our priority must be to go back to the workplace and focus on the jobs, pay and conditions of workers. Because without that foundation stone, political talk within unions will forever remain that, just talk. So let's look at where we are in the UK. Rising inflation, a tightening labour market and pay restraint. We are in the midst of another crisis where workers have been lined up to take the fall. And again, we can see the flame flicker. There are major disputes emerging across the public sector and many local disputes in the private sector. In my own union, we are now taking action in literally tens of dozens of workplaces and winning better pay. I've been on the picket lines with members and you can feel there is a real desire to see the change. We are pushing back employers and we're winning. We have to continue to build confidence in our movement, whether that be by showing workers that as leaders we stand with them, not with the boss or politicians, or by providing the support to deliver the best campaigns that we can. Confidence and support is absolutely critical. We must focus. We absolutely have no time to waste. But similar to 2008, the trade union movement again faces the question of how best to coordinate and support each other in our industrial struggle. At Stagecoach, we showed that even where there is no national bargaining, it's possible to coordinate local disputes across multiple sites, maximise our strength, and deliver in ways that otherwise would never be possible. Perfect, of course not, but it is a step forward, most definitely. Be in no doubt, Unite will be at the forefront of this struggle, and wherever our members need and want to take action, that action will happen. And wherever coordination with other unions is required, we will make the calls to make that happen. Because on the ground, this is time for us to build. Not just for this year, but for the long term. Not just opportunistically, but systematically. For me, this is what real change within the trade union movement looks like. Building the strength to win, where it matters, in the workplace and communities, not accepting real-term pay cuts or cuts to services. This is what a real fighting strategy looks like. And this is why we need to look at reform from within as well as take on the fights of the day. In many of our unions, the structures were built over 100 years ago for a very different economy and a different time. Often we are putting up accidental barriers to fight the bad boss. We are sometimes making it more difficult, not less, for workers to come together across industries and communities. We are falling short when trying to work across boundaries. So when I talk about building our industrial base, I also mean reform. We are now starting the process of developing shop stewards combines and bringing our reps together across companies and industries, building economic power to protect workers. If we have multiple sites that have local bargaining, it is still possible to act as one. It is only by bringing our reps together that we can truly rebuild our unions. Workers will join unions that are effective and deliver on jobs, pay and conditions. This also means working internationally across state lines to bring reps together globally who work for the same firm. We need to look outside and see where and why decisions are made. Who holds the power? The site in Lincoln or the CEO in Detroit? Because it's only by facing the bad employer on an equal footing that we can ever really hope to win. We cannot do that without international trade unionism, without international struggle. During the election, I talked often of the need for our union to go back to the workplace where workers are, where they need us. This is not about abandoning politics, of course not, laws matter. But what is true is that politics does not only reside in Westminster. I could also have used the term back to the people when discussing building political power. Because whilst the workplace will always be my priority, we must also reach out and help communities if we want to make change for the better. We need to start the hard work of painstaking organising, the hard miles of organising, not through symbolic gesture, but through everyday activity. I look at our movement and I see the potential for making the lives of everyday people better. The potential for us to move away from sponsoring services to addressing the needs and organising for collective strength. So what does this mean? Well, I look at the Unity Shop in Hull, started by the local Trades Council, and which is now part of delivering food to people in that community who need it, built on the principle of solidarity, not charity. This is unions doing practical work outside the workplace that people can see and they can touch. Not just campaigning for a candidate at election time, the sort of work that binds us together, the worker and the community. I want to see more than mutual aid, for campaigns that organise communities. We identify decision makers, whether they be landlords or councils, and we take them to task where needed, through effective campaigns led by our communities. This is where I see the quiet work taking place, not instead of Westminster politics, but as well as. Not instead of our industrial work, but as well as. Finally, it's time to build a movement, not a moment. It's time to get back to the workplace and to get back to the people. It's time to do the work that can really now deliver, so that we can fight austerity and the bad boss. It's time to think both global and local. It's time to ensure workers have their rightful piece of the pie and communities feel our outstretched arms. Thank you for listening. Solidarity.
We thank Sharon for sending us that video. I think she took it coming straight from a picket line as well. And so our next speaker is someone who has been a lifelong revolutionary and played a leading role in building the Socialist Party and defending the ideas of Trotskyism. His name is on many of our publications, and his articles provide the understanding and explanation of the situation facing the world's working class and what is needed to change the world. Amongst many, he recently wrote a book, The Struggle for a World Socialism, and this is the third volume of the history of the Socialist Party. It has the analysis of the development of the global capitalist system, including the financial crisis 2007 and 8, but also covers it throughout 2019, and it also covers the period of Corbynism and the lessons for us today. And if you haven't got a copy, then you can get the book tomorrow at the bookstore, or you can buy it online at leftbook.co.uk. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Peter Taaffe, the Socialist Party Political Secretary.
Thank you, Isai. Comrade Chair and comrades, the recent COP26 starkly emphasised the environmental threat posed by climate change, as Judy and other speakers have highlighted. It shows starkly the failure of capitalism to provide solutions to this major problem of humankind. But contrast the pathetic final Glasgow statement with Karl Marx's powerful statement on this issue more than 100 years ago. He wrote the following: an entire society, a nation, all simultaneously existing or all simultaneously existing societies taken together, are not the owners of the earth. They are simply its possessors and have to bequeath it to in an improved state to succeeding generations. The wrangling that led to a grudging and pathetically inadequate agreement in Glasgow underlines the complete incapacity of the present lords of finance and capital to solve the problems of the world. Yet these are the owners of the world's productive forwards. They are allegedly the stewards of society, and they hold the fate of humankind in their hands. If we do not stop their misrule, their crimes really, they promise a terrible future for humankind. It couldn't be otherwise with the capitalist system, based upon production, not for human need, but for the greed of a few. Glasgow confirmed, if it hadn't already been confirmed by the experience of the working class, that we live in a system based on the lust for profit, which, let's explain to everybody who's prepared to listen, comes from the unpaid labour of the working class, from those who really produce the wealth, the toilers in Britain and throughout the world. The system is typified in the unrestrained greed of the obscene Boris Johnson. Have you ever seen anything worse in your life? And his government of equally degenerate capitalist representatives. Before he took the train to Glasgow, he faced mounting denunciations of him and his democracy from all quarters, including in the papers that allegedly support his party. They and their predecessors have looted the treasure of the British people and state to line their own pockets while in governments. Their second jobs are not for a few extra pennies to get by or pounds to make ends meet, as is the case with workers, but for millions of pounds, like the now notorious Owen Paterson and Geoffrey Cox. A journalist gave a fitting explanation and comparison to what has been taking place. This, by the way, was a journalist from the Financial Times, an alleged Johnson supporter. He penned a vivid image of Johnson as a frantic car thief going around a car park, trying all the car doors to see if he could steal even more loot. However, such is the fear of being tainted with this thievery, and even those on his own side have begun to turn on Johnson's. Paterson's actions were so egregious, to use their terminology, in ordinary language, outrageous and unacceptable, the deeds of a practiced thief, moonlighting on his parliamentary job to the tune not of a few pounds, but of £1 million. And Cox then brazenly used his parliamentary office to conduct his real and more lucrative second job, not even bothering to excuse himself when the division bell sounded for him to go and vote in his first job. This indicates the rottenness and the corruption at the heart of the British ruling class. Contrast this obscene lifestyle of these creatures to the suffering masses in Britain and worldwide. Many workers in Britain face eviction, the rates of which have skyrocketed by 207% in the last year. Gas and electricity prices have gone through the roof as the poor huddle together. Only that much left. I'm sure they're enjoying it. Huddling together in the cold in order to keep each other warm. The gulf between rich and poor is not alleviated, but enormously compounded. The number of deaths from COVID has deepened the crisis of capitalism. It's worse in many respects than the 1918 pandemic. The COVID pandemic has aggravated the already existing situation within society. In the USA, the defeat of the Trump government seemed at first to bring an end to the nightmare rule of an out-of-control madman, and within the elements of extreme reaction in the forces he mobilized. Anybody who watched the recent TV program on the siege of the White House, an absolutely incredible TV program, may have seen that it had some of the hallmarks of the Nazis' failed attempt to seize power in 1923. However, the Trump movement is not a classically fascist movement. It is more a right-wing populist phenomena, but it does attract some fascist type like Proud Boys that we've seen in the last couple of days. Amazingly, they seem to come within a whisker of taking control of the government, the White House itself. Unfortunately, the Democrats, unbidden, have not fully learned the lesson so far. Biden has taken some progressive measures in spending on infrastructure and in creating jobs. Excuse me. But at the same time, he and his supporters have played into the hands of Trump. There's no time to go into that. But one thing is clear. The American workers need their own genuine mass party to challenge all aspects of rotten capitalism. That will undoubtedly come. It's on the agenda. There will be another attempt by the reactionary right around Trump to seize power in the round of next elections, with all the dire consequences for the working class. Similar processes are taking place in other countries. For instance, in Brazil, where the semi-dictatorship of Bolsonaro, or parliamentary dictatorship in a way, has provided over one of the highest corona death rates in the world. He's down to 20% in opinion polls, and there are barely concealed threats of a coup from the Bolsonaro camp. They want to prevent Lula, the candidate of the left, coming to power, and the mass movement's demands to put Bolsonaro on trial. In fact, no part of the world is stable now. The underlying incapacity of capitalism is demonstrated every day by the sharpening conflict between the classes. Such clashes will bring into question whether the system can be continued within the framework of capitalist democracy. In Britain, by the way, we see the colossal failure of the Johnson government, but of all of the ideologues of capitalism, and that includes the so-called leader of the Labour Party himself, Starmer. What a pathetic sight he cuts in the teeth of this terrible crisis facing working people. By the way, for any leader to be called Sir is a contradiction in terms. Could you imagine Sir Keir Hardie or Sir Tom Mann? It's an absolute scandal. And Starmer has been complicit by his misleadership in the attacks that have been made on working people. These developments underline the urgent need to fight for system change, not incidental tinkering with capitalism. It's posed by the colossal failure of the situation spelt out on this platform here today. Friedrich Engels, co-founder of Scientific Socialism with Karl Marx, talked about the bankruptcy of capitalism, despite the fact that capitalism at that time was in its heyday and played a relatively progressive role in the development of production. Capitalism in the 21st century has become an absolute barrier to the further progress in the lives of working people here and throughout the world. Friedrich Engels used the phrase in the 19th century of the invading socialist revolution to denote in his day the elements of socialism pushing through within the capitalist system, in the demand for the state to take over failing industries. Capitalism has laid the basis for overcoming scarcity and want, but because it is hemmed in by private ownership of the means of production and the limitations of the native state, capitalism at some points has been compelled to take over, to nationalize, to take into public ownership some of the utilities. This was an anticipation of the future movements of what Engels called the invading socialist revolution. That same process described by Engels is even more pronounced today. Yet the spokesman of capitalism will seek to argue that socialism is impossible. They were at it again in last week's issue of The Observer. They pointed towards Russia and say you will end up with a one-party totalitarian regime. They invoked the so-called failures of the Cuban Revolution, the Nicaraguan Revolution, and others to show that socialism has failed. However, what failed in these instances were not socialism. The leaders of the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks, saw the break with landlordism and capitalism as the overture or the detonator of revolution throughout Europe. World revolution did take place in the 10 days that shook the world, but the further spread of the revolution was betrayed by the social democratic leaders in Germany and other countries. Socialism is impossible in one country. Socialism is only possible on a higher level of production and technique than the most developed capitalist regime. That in turn is only possible on an international level through a democratic socialist confederation of Europe and of the world. The Russian Revolution in its early period was a model for the working class throughout the world. Unfortunately, it was isolated and betrayed, not by real Marxist leaders, but by the social democratic props of capitalism. Nevertheless, it initiated worldwide mass revolutionary movements. Ironically, this terrible pandemic and the incapacity of the Johnsons, the Macrons, and the rest has laid bare that capitalism has no way out for suffering humanity. We must confront facts head on. We must learn the lessons of history, understand through this school and further discussions and study of the Russian Revolution and other revolutions that followed in its wake, and of how the Russian Revolution broke at its weakest link. 2 years before the revolution, the number of revolutionary leaders in the world could be counted on one hand. They were gathered together at the Zimmerwald Conference. Less than are in this room here tonight. Yet they were preparing the mass movement of the working class, which did express itself in the Russian Revolution. We are in a similar situation today, not exactly the same, but with many of the features. So we appeal for you to go to the workshops, acquire the knowledge of our history and the current struggles of the labour movement in order to be armed politically for the mighty wave of battles that impend, and they do. Moreover, the central idea must be that we are confronting the system, not in one or two countries, but a world system. That's why we're internationalists. That's why we created the Committee for the Workers' International. If you think it's an exaggeration, that is not the view of the capitalist ideologues and experts. That is why they compiled a secret report that's just being released again. It was revealed a few years ago and so on, which pointed to the growth and influence of militants through the mighty events in Liverpool and the poll tax, in which we created an army of non-payers that not only defeated this tax, but helped bring down the Thatcher government as well. That was not the task of the misleaders of the labour movement. That was the task of militants as the vital components in the poll tax struggle itself. Once the working class moves, capitalism will be swept into the rubbish heap of history along with their representatives. We'll create a mass force of which our party and our comrades today are the embryo. It is necessary to be imbued with socialist and Marxist ideas. That's the only way to save the working class from catastrophes like the mass impoverishment of the 1930s and the terrible future in relation to the environment that's been spelt out on this platform this evening. But rather, we're all here today to lay the basis for a mass movement for democratic world socialism, leading to a democratic and socialist confederation of Europe and of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and as always, it's a great honor to listen to you. One of the themes of the rally tonight is that to save our lives and livelihood, we need international action. The fight for socialism is international, and so are we. We're now going to see a short video, a solidarity video, from Abby Trotsky, our comrade from the CWI section in Nigeria, the Democratic Socialist Movement. The Nigerian comrades are facing a very difficult situation. They recently had a student activist who got murdered, who leaves behind a wife and a young child. And Abiy himself is facing multiple legal battles for his solidarity with workers in struggle and against casualization. So Theo is now going to play the video.
Yeah, my name is Comrade Abby Trotsky. I'm a member of Democratic Socialist Movement, DSM, the Nigerian section of Committee for Workers International, CWI. I'm sending this solidarity message to wish our sister organization, Socialist Party of England and Wales, a very successful deliberation as it holds its national workshop tagged Socialism 2021 this weekend. To us in Nigeria, the work and activities of members of Socialist Party of England and Wales has been a good source of inspiration and motivation, for us. And so therefore, we hope that this workshop, which is coming this weekend, and its outcome, will greatly help to strengthen the commitment and dedication of the entire members of Socialist Party of England and Wales towards the actualization of socialist transformation of England and Wales and its economy, which to us we believe is going to be a huge contribution to a struggle for a socialist world. We look forward in the coming period for a more strengthening, fraternal and revolutionary relationship towards a struggle for a world, revolution. And Luther continua, Victoria Asata.
Thank you, Abby. I'm now going to invite our next speaker, Ian Hodson, the president of the Bakers Union. Now, Ian is not a new face. He has been a comrade and an ally. And I want to really thank Ian tonight, who is joining us in the middle of a very busy time, and I think straight from another meeting as well. He, like us, has been fighting for a real living wage for workers, and the Socialist Party agrees with the Bakers Union and is campaigning for a £15 an hour. And today, the union is also predominant following its disaffiliation from the Labour Party after the right-wing attack on Ian in terms of suspending him from the Labour Party. And I just want to say that, we agree with the trade union motto that an injury to one is an injury to all, and an attack on one is an attack on all. So Ian, I invite you to address the floor.
Comrades, sisters and brothers, it's a pleasure to be with you. Normally, the only time I get a second appearance is when the judge adjourns. So it's quite an unusual occurrence, but obviously I appreciate the invitation, and I think what we're seeing at this moment in time is a political landscape that doesn't represent our interests, doesn't fight for our class, doesn't believe in the things that we believe in. I think, you know, what we're seeing in Westminster and that Westminster bubble is no longer serving the interests of the people. I mean, you know, they often talk about, when we talk about increasing taxes, as it being, you know, the politics of envy. Well, it's not the politics of envy, it's the politics of necessity. There's a reason why people at the top need to pay the taxes, because the burden that falls on the shoulders with the least is one that they can no longer handle. When we live in a society that says exploitation of workers is okay, where homelessness is okay, that is not a society that should be representative of the fifth richest economy in the world. We've just gone through a COVID pandemic. We've just gone through a COVID pandemic where our members went to work on a daily basis, but we recently took out a survey on those workers to find out what their lives were like, to find out what it was like to be a worker in a food factory that kept this nation fed. 40% of the people that kept this nation fed found themselves reliant on charity and goodwill of friends and family. 35% did without food, so others in their household couldn't eat. 7.5% used food banks. These are the people that kept our nation fed. And the Labour Party that we founded in 1902 when we levied our members, didn't stand up for our members, didn't fight for our members, didn't put their issues forward, and our members said, you know, if that's the way you're going to treat us, after all the money that we've put into you, to not represent our interest, to not fight to make sure that we're safe in our workplace, then we no longer want to be part of a party that wants to represent bosses and not the workers. It was really telling at the Labour Party conference, wasn't it? The only real decent policy that the front bench came out with was the employment policy, which was a creation of a collective decision-making process of trade unions and Andy MacDonald. Andy MacDonald attended a meeting to fight for the right for working class people to have a minimum wage of £15 an hour. And bear in mind, I attended the Chulo meeting where Keir Starmer told all of the general secretaries of Chulo he was open and committed to raising working class expectation and open to £15 an hour. And what does he do? He sacks Andy MacDonald for fighting for the right for workers to have a decent wage. That is not aspiration for working class people. That isn't the reason why we started the Labour Party in 1902 with hard-working people's money. That is a sellout. That is a party that doesn't represent our interests or represent our class. And let's be clear, because this issue is about class. This fight is about class. And we are under no illusion of what it means to be outside the Labour Party, because what it means for us as a union and what we have decided to do is we ain't going to rely on Westminster to change the lives of the people that we represent or the communities that we live in, because we know they've failed us. In 1902, when John Jenkins, our then General Secretary, was giving a speech to our membership on the reasons why we should set that party up, he was doing it at a background where the Liberal Party said the working class have nowhere else to go to. The working class needs to vote for the Liberal Party. The working class must realise that we're the only change that's open to them. And in 1902, the only thing that the Liberals did and had was a position where they said that they would raise our expectations. Raise them, not deliver them. And we formed the Labour Party to deliver our expectations for the Labour classes, not to sell us out. In 1902, the Liberal Party, this is very reflective of where we are today. The Liberal Party leadership was going in an opposite direction to what the people needed, because it thought that was its way to win power in Parliament. And since 1902, when the King was feeding 500,000 people in London, we now rely on a footballer to feed our school children. What a terrible situation after 119 years of a party that was representative of our class. But for us, we see it as a challenge to build real political power. And we're seeing now, and I know Sharon's been here talking today about what Unite's been doing, and I want to send solidarity to all of those striking workers. I believe she's got 41 strikes currently going on. Those are people who are unhappy because of fire and rehire, unhappy because of the wages they get and the exploitation of the terms and conditions that they have. And it's right that workers stand up and take industrial action when the bosses don't listen. They will always tell us, by the way, that we can't win, but yet, whenever we take action, we are successful. Look at what we achieved with a few people in McDonald's. The biggest ever pay increase awarded to British working McDonald's workers because of the courage and determination and strength of those McDonald's workers that went out on strike. And when they went out on strike the second time, they offered an end to 0-hour contracts, and the first time an introduction of permanent contracts of employment. Don't tell me striking doesn't work. And with a handful of people in Brighton at Wetherspoons, they went on strike and they won for all of the Wetherspoons workers a £1 an hour increase when they worked on night shift. They brought forward a pay claim. They improved their health and safety. That's workers standing together and showing what can happen when we understand solidarity always wins. Always wins. And that's why now, as a trade union, we take on this opportunity to show that we, as a trade union, have a lot to offer to our communities. And that's why, as a trade union, we have decided we're no longer going to put our money into the Labour Party. What we're going to do is we're going to start working in community centres up and down the country, offering employment advice and support, offering people in need of debt advice, offering those who are struggling on welfare benefits, who are struggling to find decent homes and decent houses. We're going to support them by placing ourselves and offering our services for free, because we're going to build real power in our communities, real power in our workforce, and the only way we'll ever do it is when we get back on where we belong, in the centre, in the heart of a community, building that struggle from within, because that's how we build the society that we deserve. That's how we win together, collectively, together in our communities, demonstrating when they talk about who to blame, we'll say it isn't you, it never has been. It's been those Westminster politicians who are on a gravy train, and we've seen it, haven't we? We've seen it this week, and people are getting angry. They're angry because of the corruption. They're angry because of the amount of taxpayers' money that they're taking. But that's been a long thing that they've been doing. What people really need to get angry about is the fact that we have people living on our streets. That's what people need to get angry about. We need to get angry because people don't have enough wages each week to pay to be able to afford the rent, the heat, and the food. Those are the things we need to tell people they need to be angry about. We need to explain to people These are the decisions by Westminster politicians who don't represent our interests, don't represent our class, and take that to every part of our community and build better, because we deserve it. We deserve a society that represents us, a representative society. And you know, sometimes they talk about how they deliver. Let's not forget the NHS wasn't delivered because of politicians. And when you talk about socialism, to me, the NHS is proof that socialism works. The NHS came out because of Welsh miners over in the pits who said, we're going to build a health service to make sure the people here in Wales can make sure that they have a healthcare system that they can afford. And that's what were the founding roots of our NHS. But sometimes the history never tells us the truth, because they want us to believe all of the power is in Westminster. All of the power, as it's always been, is with every person in every community. And when we stand in solidarity, we will always win. And that's the key. They can blame whichever group they want. But let's be clear. Let's be clear. It was never a Polish worker that came over here that forced us onto 0 hours contracts. It was never a refugee that came over here and stopped us from getting decent homes and decent houses. They were political decisions. We want 1 million council houses to rehouse people. We want everybody to be in an employment contract, not as an aspiration, but as a right, because we deserve those rights to dignity and to respect. So thank you very much for inviting me to come here today. We fight for 15. We fight against 0 hours. And we fight for the right of young people not to be discriminated, not because they haven't got the skills, but just because they're not at the right age. Solidarity.
Thank you, Ian, and spoken like a real trade union there. I'm now going to hand over to Helen Patterson, the Socialist Party London Secretary for the Financial Appeal.
We approach every problem from a socialist angle, every political and practical task we face. From poverty pay, tuition fees, the fight against racism, sexism, homophobia and discrimination against disabled people, the housing crisis, the trade union movement, the climate chaos that, as Judy outlined, capitalism is incapable of overcoming, to the question of funding our party's work, we approach it as socialists. Today we can see the growing anger and struggle in society. It's in the pages of our newspaper, which on our own, none of us individually has the financial means to fund or run a newspaper. It requires our collective organisation. Our paper was produced and distributed throughout the pandemic, reporting on struggles and offering a programme to working class people fighting for organising for safety against fire and rehire, and all the ways the bosses try and divide and push down our living standards. We stood out against the lie of national unity. There is no such thing. There is only the interests of the working class and the opposing interests of the bosses. The job of our paper and our party has always been to tell the truth to the working class, starting with the need of working class people to organise and fight back, to defend our living standards and rights, and therefore drawing the conclusion of the need to change society. When our printing press broke down, we turned to our collective strength to raise the funds to replace it. When we were evicted from our previous offices, so that they could be made into shoebox-sized, expensive flats, we turned to our members and the wider trade union movement to help us secure a new building. We asked everyone we had campaigned alongside, everyone we had supported and fought for, everyone we had worked with. Our members and the movement delivered, and now we have a new office. So sometimes appeals like this are to help pay for a specific thing. But today is different. Today's appeal is about having the finances to take part in the growing struggle of working class people. Because there's no one thing we need, but actually a multitude. We are preparing our party politically, organisationally and financially for the big class struggles which lie ahead, when workers will take action against the bosses. We need more organisers in our national office, we need more organisers in our regions, and we need to build more branches. Trotsky said, "We are not a party as other parties. Our ambition is not only to have more members, more papers, more money in the treasury, more deputies. All that is necessary, but only as a means." So I'm asking you to donate tonight because the lid has been lifted on capitalism and its rottenness, and the need for a party based on Marxism that has strength and confidence in the working class is great. And we need the financial means to fund all of our campaign work during these struggles. The climate crisis is an amazing example and has already featured heavily in the rally tonight. The recent Glasgow demonstrations show the huge anger that exists at the continued destruction of the environment and our futures. But even more people would have been protesting against COP had a clear lead been offered by the trade union and Labour leaders. But they did not put forward a programme that can unite workers and young people who feel fear for their futures. Our party and sister organisation in Scotland are absolutely necessary to these movements. We were the only organisation putting forward a clear socialist programme on the demonstration. And our placards with the bold slogan, "To build a mass working class movement for socialist change to end climate change," our leaflets pointing a way forward were all enthusiastically snapped up. We are fighting for the whole of the climate movement to take up the socialist ideas necessary to defeat capitalism, because it will always put profit before people and the planet. We raise the need to build a new mass workers' party as part of that movement, with a socialist programme to nationalise under democratic workers' control and management the big polluters and energy companies. This could lay the basis for the democratic socialist planning and international cooperation needed to secure a decent future for the working class and ensure a socialist transition to clean energy. No one else is going to fight for these ideas, but to win that programme in the movement requires a number of things. One, it requires the need for discussion and debate like this weekend in our branches and more. Two, we need everyone here in the room and those paying attention online to be bold and confident in the ideas we're fighting for. But thirdly, we need the financial resources to fund all of that work. And donating to the Socialist Party today can do that. So now it turns to you. You all have a little pink slip on your seat, which you can fill out with your own donation, or it can be filled in by a group of comrades making a donation collectively. And I'm going to open tonight's appeal by asking if there's any comrade or group of comrades who are able to make a donation of £2,000 or more. While those come in, we'd like to take this second to commemorate comrades who have passed away in the last year. We've already had one sad but stirring donation from the legacy of Tom Prentiss. Tom was a comrade of Socialist Party Scotland and sadly died last year, but he spent a number of years as a member in England and Wales, living in South East London. So £5,000 from his legacy has been donated to the appeal tonight. We've had another anonymous appeal, but thank you still, of £5,000 to the appeal today. And the comrades from Wales have raised £3,100 for the appeal. Our programme, the reports and articles in our paper and on our leaflets are an important tool to workers who are engaging in struggle. For example, during the recent 13-week-long dispute by the Sparks, we produced a regular bulletin covering their fight, next steps and more. It was so popular they rang up our office asking for more bulletins. Such is the respect of our party and ideas, but all of that material cost money. So I'd now like to ask if there's any donations of £1,000 or more from a group of comrades or individual. Bristol North branch have raised £1,380. Socialist Party members in CWU Union are donating £1,000. Hackney and Islington branch are donating £1,760. And Waltham Forest branch are donating £1,320. And finally, Coventry branch are donating £1,050. For context, we've already spent £600 on material for the NHS disputes. Our NHS staff are fighting for the 15% pay rise that they deserve, and we're an important part of that struggle. Our material puts forward a programme to keep the pressure on the health union leaders during the consultative and industrial ballots taking place. So I'd now like to ask if there's any donations of £500 or more that comrades can give. Joe Fatala from Cardiff East is donating £500. Thank you very much. In memory of Tony Davidson, who passed away several months ago, Hull branch is donating £500. And Tessa Warrington from Leicester is donating £500. Sam Coxon from Gloucestershire is donating £500. The branch in Gloucestershire is also donating £500, and Nottingham Socialist Party has raised £535. Stevenage branch have raised £1,500. Just for a little more context, you'll see some very beautiful flags on the stage that we've got unprinted. They raise the need to challenge capitalism and fight for socialist change to save the environment. They cost us £400 to buy. Obviously, we can reuse them, but that shows you how the money can be used. The new branch, which has just been reformed, of Haringey and Camden have raised £755. Mansfield branch have included in their donation 1 week's wage from a new low-paid member and have raised £550. We should also say that the money raised tonight isn't just about preparing the party in this country, but a proportion is donated to our international also. It helps support the work of our sister organisations around the world in the Committee for a Workers' International. Because real internationalism is political. It's fighting to build new mass workers' struggle around the world, and you're helping be part of that struggle by donating tonight. So we'd now like to ask if there's any donations of £100 or more, of which we already know there is one. £100 has been donated by Hazel Douglas, the sister of Ken Douglas. Ken was our national organiser between 2007 until his untimely death last year, so it's a greatly appreciated donation. Ted Woodley from Birmingham North has donated £300. Lavinia from South West London branch has donated £100. And Maddie Steeds from Manchester and Salford branch has donated £200. Paul from Harlow, Essex has donated £500. We also know that many people in this room tonight live on a tight budget, but that's because we value all and every contribution made to our party. If a donation is a sacrifice to the movement, for the struggle for socialism, it's of enormous value to us, no matter its size. Donations of £5, £10 and £20, if it means a lot to you, it means a lot to us. So we'd like you now, if there's any more slips, you can send them up of smaller amounts, and we'd like to take the chance to read some of those out as well. Howard Oakes from Bradford's donating £100. Sam Morden from South Tyne and Wear is donating £200. Adam Manley from West London branch is donating £250. Hugo from Brighton branch is donating £10. Evelyn Ryan from Bradford's donating £5. Adam Gilman, who is a school student in Reading, is donating £10. Oh, and we've had £10 donation from the security guard. Thank you very much. Wolverhampton branch is donating £260. Sada Mohammed from Leicester is donating £5. Elaine Brunskild from the Northern Regions donating £50. Stanley Harris from South West London is donating £5. And Lily Douglas from Waltham Forest branch is donating £5. I'm afraid that's all the donations that we're able to read out tonight. And thank you so much for those sacrifices and contributions. There's now going to be buckets that are sent round, so you can put any remaining slips into those, but also any cash you might have left lying around. And to repeat an old cliche, notes are quieter than coins as the rally continues. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Helen. And keep the donation coming in, and we will announce the results as soon as we can. Our stewards are working on it. But if you're watching us online and haven't made a donation, you can still do. Head to our website at socialistparty.org.uk/donate and donate to us as well. So in the recent period, there has been an increase in attack on trade union reps and activists. When bosses feel threatened by organised workers, they try to get rid of them, and they try to get rid of the most militant reps. And just want to take a moment tonight to send our solidarity to the numerous teachers who are being victimised, as well as sacked bus drivers, postal workers, and retail workers. The Socialist Party Socialist Party members have been supporting and defending victimised reps and activists, as well as fighting for their reinstatement. Our next speaker is a victimised shop steward in the retail union Astor. He, amongst many, has been a key worker working during the pandemic to make sure that our society functions. So I now invite Max to come to the stage.
Comrades, we often talk of COVID to be the great accelerator. This has been proven true again and again. Trade union membership has increased consecutively 4 years in a row, and our socialist paper is littered with each week with news of struggles, and we're seeing more and more interested in socialist ideas. This shows that a fighting programme is worth its salt. Since the pandemic, trade union membership has increased by 118,000, and even through a complicated crisis of capitalism layered by debt, disease and pandemic profiteering, the sights and confidence of workers in Britain have been raised. When the government released their essential workers list at the start of the pandemic, I did not see one CEO on there. It is the cleaning, warehouse, engineering and bar workers, amongst many more, that have kept society running long before COVID and will continue to keep it running long after. Until very recently, I was an USDOR rep and branch secretary in my own workplace, a warehouse in Hinckley in the East Midlands, and I was proud to put into practice the methods instilled in me by the party, by all of you who make up this disciplined organisation. To represent workers as I would want representation, to have encouraged branch participation, and to have collected a mailing list of 33 workers using a pen and paper to avoid any screenshots coming back to bite, and to have even played a small role in showing my co-workers that when we fight, we can win. For example, when organising a mass grievance in the depot against performance targets during lockdown, and when we beat back using Section 44, an unsafe working practice that resulted in multiple injuries to staff. To celebrate our victories cautiously and to learn from our defeats zealously. In a depot that has seen on-site deaths from overwork and including multiple COVID deaths. As a result of this industrial action already taken, a pattern of consistent trade union victimisation against me emerged, including a final written which was overturned due to the only witness being the investigating manager. An upheld final written for alleged theft, which is usually a fireable offence, but which never stuck because it included false statements and entrapment. Further to this, a successful harassment grievance was won against my line manager for encouraging co-workers to follow me around when carrying out my trade union duties. Finally, a successful dismissal notice. And for what? Helping a pregnant colleague change a forklift battery and being electrocuted due to the company's faulty equipment. I was then accused of making up my injuries. When confronted with the evidence of the first aiders report, they simply claimed that the initial charge was a typo and changed the charge and accused me instead of exaggerating my injury and fired me for that. I was unfairly dismissed just weeks before an indicative strike ballot. This ballot revealed that out of 409 workers asked, 333 voted in favour of industrial action for the first time in this warehouse's history. Since its construction in 1989. What a shocker that this anger will not fizzle out. Comrades, I will take this unfair dismissal all the way to an employment tribunal. I know I have the party behind me, and I will never forget the date of my first appeal where my full-time official who was representing me told me that he didn't believe my case and he was only defending me because he was paid to do so. He told me that the best chance of me getting my job back was to de-recognise myself as a union rep in front of the company. Yet I will also never forget and take heart How many of my colleagues who I've represented have checked in on me, supported me, and hoped this could get sorted quickly so I could get back to being their rep. Some of those workers were the first to join our mailing list and have stood shoulder to shoulder with me since we relocated branch meetings back on site after the previous branch secretary held them at Bedworth Conservative Club. I really wish I was joking. Usdor's so-called leadership still refuses to mention anything about the ballot on their national website. However, Usdor's infamous right-wing control of the union shown signs of cracking, with our comrade Amy Murphy, who was also a Socialist Party member, previously been elected as president, and Ryan Aldred coming within 180 votes of an EC seat. Comrades, the victories in my workplace were precisely because of the collective power and our strength. And they were not against me as an individual, but they were against any working class person who stands up and fights tooth and nail for his class. I'm proud to say that I will still go out and support my co-workers on their picket line, armed with a copy of the Socialist Party newspaper. In the meantime, the bosses who demonise me will get a taste of working class solidarity. Comrades, our time is coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. Now, our final speaker today will be the General Secretary of the Socialist Party. As you already know from hearing the speakers, the Socialist Party doesn't just stand back and watches the event passively. At each opportunity, we put forward a program to take the movement forward. We have produced a draft manifesto with our demand and a program to achieve a socialist society. This is now currently being discussed in branches and regions and will be finalized at our National Congress next year. I now welcome Hannah Sell, who's going to talk about the Socialist Party perspectives and strategy and the tactics required for the victory for a socialist change.
Comrades, this is the second socialism event that we've held during a global pandemic. And I think the fantastic finance collection we've just had, but also this rally, the fact that we have been able, at a time of big difficulties, a resurging virus, to be able to go ahead and hold this rally with all the technical problems that come with hybrid, and we've had a few of them tonight, is an enormous achievement and a sign of the fighting strength of the Socialist Party. But that is not why this is the most important socialism event we've ever held. The reason it is the most important is because of what the working class has been through in the last couple of years and what it is facing in the period that we are going into. I'm sure that most of the young people in the hall tonight who are new to the Socialist Party, count yourselves amongst the 67% of 16 to 34-year-olds in Britain who want to live in a socialist economic system. The fact that the majority of young people in Britain consider themselves socialists is obviously partly a positive legacy of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. Young people in a broad sense found out about socialist ideas while Corbyn was Labour leader. But it's not the main factor. That survey that showed 67% of young people are socialists took place in the era of Starmer, at a time when there is no leader of a major party in this country who puts forward any form of socialist ideas. But on the contrary, as Ian has already made extremely clear, we have a leader of the Labour Party who is straining every nerve to show to the capitalist class that he will reliably represent their interests rather than the interests of the working class. He's doing it by expelling socialists from the Labour Party hand over fist. And he's doing it by abandoning Corbyn's programme at a rate of knots. Ian has already referred to the refusal to support a £15 an hour minimum wage. At Labour Party conference, Starmer also refused to support nationalisation of the energy industry just as the price hikes and the shortages were kicking in. This is not about retreating from unpopular policies. Every poll for a decade or more has shown that more than half the population support nationalisation of the energy industries. This is about showing the ruling elite, the capitalist class, whose side Starmer is on. That is on the side of the bosses, not the workers. But Starmer's charge to the right has not altered the popularity of left ideas and the search for a socialist alternative. And that is because the main thing driving it is not what any politician is saying, it's people's own experience of capitalism. The misery that capitalism means, the inability of capitalism, as other speakers have already said, to deal with the climate catastrophe. The farce of COP26. By the way, there were 14 trade union leaders in Britain who wrote to the COP26 summit, and they urged the COP26 to talk to workers and their representatives, as workers know what's best for them and understand their jobs and industries. I think it's clear to everyone in this hall, there is absolutely no chance of the COP26 listening to workers rather than listening to the 500 lobbyists for the oil and gas industry who were at that summit. But nonetheless, the letter was completely right to say that it is workers who understand their jobs and industries, who understand how a genuine green transition could be organised. Look at the GKN workers who in Birmingham and also in Italy have explained how the driveline systems they produce for cars could be very easily converted to electric vehicles, have described exactly how to do it. Have their bosses listened? No. Their bosses have gone ahead, shut the plant, are shutting the plant in Birmingham and want to do the same in Italy. Letters are okay, but only collective action can force capitalist governments and bosses to listen. The Birmingham workers had an overwhelming vote for strike action and at least were able to force a bit of a better deal for that workforce. But in Italy, the GKN workers have occupied the plant, are mobilising, they've had 40,000 on the streets in support of them, and they are raising the need for nationalisation. And that's the point, isn't it? The crisis of capitalism objectively raises the need for socialist policies. What Engels and also Peter Taaffe in his excellent speech tonight talked about the invading socialist revolution. That was true before the pandemic, but it is 1,000 times more true now. And in more than one sense, anybody looking at capitalism's woeful ability to deal with the pandemic could despair at the prospect of capitalism ever being able to do anything effective about the much bigger challenge of climate change. The fact that as many as 10 million people have died globally, that 48% of the world's population have not had a single dose of the vaccine, while meanwhile the big pharmaceutical companies made £26 billion in profits in the first 6 months of this year alone. That's one side of the picture. But the other is that the vaccines were developed so quickly, compared, for example, to the more than 3 decades in which they failed to produce a vaccine for malaria, which kills over 500,000 children, mainly in Africa, every year. How did they develop the vaccine so quickly? Because governments intervened. States bankrolled the private pharmaceutical companies. $100 billion in state subsidies to the pharmaceutical giants for vaccine development. That makes it so obvious that rather than add to the profits of these giant corporations, the pharmaceutical industry should be nationalised under democratic works of control and management, so that all of that science and technique and talent could be harnessed to meet the needs of everybody, to vaccinate the world, to develop the medicines and vaccines that are necessary. Post-pandemic, the working class is facing inflation austerity, as price increases run ahead of our wages, our services and our benefits are still being cut, and our taxes are being hiked. Yet everybody saw, during the pandemic, the Tory government paid 80% of 11 million workers' wages. It wasn't enough, but it was more than double, for example, what was in Corbyn's programme in 2019 in terms of money. It was vast sums of money pumped in, unprecedented, outside of wartime. The Tories did that to prop up their capitalist system, but it still smashes the capitalists' own historical propaganda that the free market is the only way to run the world, that state intervention is wrong. And objectively, it poses the question, instead of handing over billions to prop up private companies, why not nationalise those major corporations and banks to start to build a socialist planned economy, which really could meet the needs of all and have a genuine green transition, which wasn't about punishing workers, but providing, for example, free public transport for all, free home insulation for everybody, the mass building of high-quality, carbon-neutral council housing. The capitalists understand this process, and it frightens them. If you read the pages of their own newspapers, they talk about it all the time. There was a particularly frenzied piece in the right-wing Daily Telegraph just last week, where it talked about how government policies, the current Tory government's policies, are not genuine free market capitalism. It's a warped, corrupting ersatz that is destroying the social compact and will fuel a disastrous class warfare and embolden the hard left. It was a frenzied article, but fundamentally it was correct. The logic of socialism as the only way forward is embedded in society and becomes more obvious with every passing day. Of course, that does not mean that a new socialist order will be as easily achieved or is preordained. The capitalists still have a few big advantages. Right now, the working class, the people who we keep society running, who make the profits of the bosses, collectively we are the force that is capable of ending capitalism and introducing a new democratic socialist order. And in a country like Britain, the working class has enormous potential power, is a big majority of society. But right now, largely as a result of the role of the trade union, the right-wing trade union leaders over a whole period, many workers feel powerless to fight back in their own workplaces, never mind to try and fight to change society. And that is fueled by the lack of any mass party that is fighting on their side. Nonetheless, as I think has already been very clear at this rally tonight, we are at the start of a new phase of struggle and an increased confidence and combativity amongst many sections of the working class. That's true in many countries worldwide. Look at the US strike wave that is taking place in the most powerful capitalist country on the planet. Look, by the way, another section of the oppressed, but the victory of the farm workers against the supposedly all-powerful Modi in India that has just taken place. But it is also true here in Britain. And we in the Socialist Party have an important role to play in accelerating that process. The pandemic led to a bosses' offensive to fire and rehire and all the other ways they try to make sure that we pay for the crisis. But it also created an increased awareness of who runs society. That fundamentally, it's not the bosses and the capitalist politicians that keep things running, it's the essential workers, the whole of the working class. And the post-pandemic shortages, which are not universal but are in some sectors, they are fueling that confidence. We keep society running and we have the power to fight for a bit more. As others have said, trade union membership is on the rise, but there is also an increase in strikes of a determined character, and not every strike wins, but there is an increase in the number of victories. Like the South Wales stagecoach drivers who've just won a victory after 17 days of all-out strike action. That increasingly combative mood has already led to changes in the trade unions, has fueled the election of militant trade union leaders. We've heard from Sharon Graham and Carmel Gates tonight. Unison, the biggest public sector union, has a left majority on its executive for the first time in the history of that union. On a smaller scale, the Socialist Party has gone from 1 till 5 on the executive of the teachers' union. And the election of more fighting leaders also then fuels a confidence to struggle. Lots of people have already said that there's more than 50 live disputes currently going on in Unite. By the way, as Sharon rightly said, it's not either or, but every victory that those strikes win will do more to prevent workers going hungry than any amount of organising food banks. That is the most effective way to fight to increase the the income of the working class. It's not enough just to elect leaders. An important part of the role of the Socialist Party is to fight for the building of new lefts, or to strengthen the existing lefts in some cases, to bring together all of the rank-and-file militants in every trade union who want to campaign for that to be a fighting democratic union. That's a process. It won't happen in one act, but it will be linked to the ongoing struggles taking place. The essential struggle at the moment, for example, over the fight for coordinated strike action to smash the public sector pay freeze. That's not simple. We can't go at the rate of the slowest vehicle. We have to have a coalition of the willing, who are those who are up for the fight and start to organise action. And there are also real obstacles created by the undemocratic anti-trade union laws. But the tremendous result in the UCU ballot does show that it is possible to get the turnout in order to be able to go ahead with legal strike action. However, as we all know from recent experience, having jumped through every hoop the government puts up does not always prevent the capitalist courts blocking strikes taking place. And that's why Sharon, for example, has been absolutely right to say that if necessary, she supports breaking undemocratic laws to defend workers' interests. Of course, no one does that lightly. We have to weigh up the balance of forces, but we also cannot allow these undemocratic laws to prevent effective struggle in workers' interests. When the tabloids picked up on that statement by Sharon, immediately Starmer waded in to point out that he is always in favour of obeying the law. It's no surprise this man, as the Director of Public Prosecutions, presided over the jailing of students who had been campaigning against the Tory condemned government tuition fee hike at that point in time. We know what his position is. But it does point to another vital role of the Socialist Party, that alongside fighting to increase militancy and the fight back in the workplace, we also have to fight for a voice in the political field. We know Starmer's New Labour is nothing of the kind. That is not just because he's incompetent. I mean, he is totally incompetent. But such is the sleaze and splits that this Tory government is currently drowning in. It is actually a very weak government, despite Starmer's uselessness. You can't rule out a Labour government being thrust into power. And if that was to happen, of course, millions of people would be relieved to get rid of the Tories. We'd all be relieved to get rid of the Tories. But let's be clear, Starmer is making absolutely clear to everybody that, like Blair before him, he would act in the interests of the capitalist class. But it wouldn't be in the 1990s. It would be in this era of capitalist crisis where the big business would expect him to make much more savage attacks on the working class. The likely result of that will be what happened to the equivalents of Labour in Greece and France when they implemented austerity and were shattered, have really in reality become ex-parties. That in turn raises the real danger. There's already a danger of this, but it will grow in those circumstances, that right-wing racist forces would cynically step in and try and harness popular anger. And it urgently poses the need for a mass party that stands in the interests of the working class. That responds to the sleaze scandal in Parliament by saying our MPs will only take a worker's wage, as Dave Nellis, Socialist Party National Committee member, did when he was a Labour MP. That fights tooth and nail for the abolition of the anti-trade union laws, the police and crime bill, and all the rest of it. Would fight in the Welsh Parliament, for example, not just to support the stagecoach workers, but for the renationalisation of the whole of the transport industry in Wales, booting out Stagecoach, which were given the contract by a Welsh Labour government. And such a party, even if it initially only had a handful of MPs, would give confidence to the working class and would terrify the capitalist elite. Look back at the pre-history of the Labour Party that Ian talked about, when working class people began to create their own political voice. Then, as today, anti-trade union laws were a vital part of that. You could say the first big breakthrough came in 1906. The forebears of Labour didn't win the general election. They got 29 MPs elected. But the result of the workers' movement entering the political arena was forcing the incoming Liberal government to repeal the vicious anti-trade union legislation that existed at that point in time, because they felt the hot breath of the working class on their necks. And that's why Ian and the Bakers Union collectively should be absolutely commended for the principled stand they've taken. It's not easy when you've helped to found a party to say that you're going to disaffiliate from it, but to recognise not only that that is necessary, but that it is not a question of becoming an unpolitical trade union, but looking for a new form of workers' politics. That is an enormously heroic and important step. Sharon from Unite, still affiliated to Labour, has also raised the need for workers' politics. And there's no question, it's going to take time for the workers' movement to discuss out how we build workers' politics in this post-Corbyn era. But in the view of the Socialist Party, having failed to transform Labour under Corbyn, we do not think that a mass workers' party will come from within the current undemocratic framework of the Labour Party. We have to be prepared, as the Bakers Union have done, to step outside. And we will welcome and try to assist every step towards independent workers' politics. We will do all we can to speed that process up. We work as part of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition. It's a modest force. It's got one union affiliated at this point in time, the Transport Workers Union, the RMT. But it offers to all those trade unionists who want to defend workers' interests at the ballot box a banner under which they can do so. It was able to stand over 300 candidates at this May's election, and we are sure we will be able to do far more next May. Because let's be clear, local authority austerity is not ending. The Tory government have not given enough to even cover the inflationary pressures that exist. But it is absolutely unnecessary. Labour councils in London alone have accumulated an extra £1.2 billion in reserves in the course of 2020. What rainy day are they saving it for? When are they going to need it more than it's been needed in the course of the last year, when poverty has soared in London, when evictions are rising hand over fist, often carried out by Labour councils? And yet, that's what they're doing. Unite Conference, a resolution moved by a Socialist Party member, agreed this year to call on councils to implement no-cuts, needs-based budgets. We're here tonight in the area where the popular councillors first coined the idea that it's better to break the law than to break the poor. Liverpool City Council carried on that tradition. Today, they're not being asked to break the law. Their choice is not even that. What they've got to do is be prepared to use their legal powers to set needs budgets, to meet the needs of their population, and then launch a fight to get the money back from the government. Instead, in Tower Hamlets, they led the way on fire and rehire. What more do you need to know? It's absolutely right, as Sharon said, that it's not just about campaigning at election time. But it's also absolutely right that for all of those who are campaigning all the time, whether they're trade unionists fighting the pay freeze, or community activists running food banks, whether they're fighting evictions at local level. For all of them, their struggles will be strengthened if they back it up by standing against the cutters in the elections. So, that's a very important part of the struggle going forward, to encourage trade unionists to stand in elections, to do it ourselves, and to offer Tusk as a banner that is available for those that want to use it. But to finish, in the Socialist Party, we're the hardest campaigners to increase the fighting strength of the trade unions, to build support for community struggles, and to take steps forward towards the working class having its own political voice. But that is only one part of our dual tasks. We also fight to build support for the programme of the Socialist Party, for a break with capitalism, for the nationalisation of the major corporations and banks under workers' control and management, so we can build a new socialist order, both in Britain and internationally. And at all stages, in every struggle we're involved in, we attempt to convince people of our socialist programme. Why does it matter? It matters, first of all, because those forces who clearly understand the bankruptcy of capitalism and all the tasks that flow from that are amongst the hardest fighters on the day-to-day struggles that we face. But also because a Marxist party, a party that has learned all the lessons of workers' struggles over the last century and more, is vital to a successful socialist transformation of society. That doesn't mean we can short-circuit history. I know, faced with the horror of capitalism, there are a lot of young people at the moment who are feeling we've just got to do something. And if we substitute ourselves for the mass, we can change the world now. But it takes the mass of the working class to transform society. The 2,000 or so of us in the Socialist Party, never mind individuals, cannot jump over that process. But whether we are there or not, there are going to be mass movements, revolutionary movements, fighting for a new and different order, which have enormous heroism. Look, in the recent period, at the movements that have taken place in the Sudan, a tremendous revolutionary struggle against a vicious military dictatorship, successfully overthrown, only for the new civilian government to leave, in reality, the military running most of the show. And as we predicted, the military bided its time and moved to overthrow the government and try and crush the movement. But even looking from a distance, it is absolutely clear that the masses taking part in that heroic movement, organising general strikes, they're not just heroic, they understand what's going on and what's needed. As the coup was threatened, there were huge demonstrations and the banners read, either civil power or eternal revolution. All power should be in the hands of the people. The brutal military coup that's taken place has not cowed the movement. They're continuing to organise general strikes. But their position would be enormously strengthened if they had a party, even if it had been a small minority before the revolution, who understood the lessons of history, understood the lessons they're learning in the heat of the struggle, and was prepared to lead the working class in a struggle for power, breaking with capitalism and feudalism. The lessons of that magnificent movement in the Sudan, which will be repeated in many other struggles around the world, are not only applicable in those countries, but internationally. And we in the Socialist Party and the international we're part of, you've heard from one of the comrades in Nigeria tonight, the Committee for Workers International, we are attempting to begin building at least the beginning of such a party worldwide. Capitalism is a sick, ailing system. It is no longer able to take society forward. Most people agree with that, frankly. The question is, how can we build an alternative? How can we end this rotten capitalist system? We're not yet in a revolutionary period in Britain, but we are in a period of growing mass struggles where the majority of the population are looking to the left for an alternative. And we are going to have opportunities in the next period by playing a role in all of these struggles and raising the need for socialism to build a mass force that will be capable of leading a successful struggle for socialism. I would say to everyone in this hall tonight and the people listening on Zoom around the country, or it's not Zoom, but whatever it is, that if you haven't yet joined the Socialist Party, if you agree with what's been said, then don't sit back. We need to act, we need to organise, and our party can make a real difference. So join us in the struggle for socialism.
Thank you, Hannah, and what an end to a really fantastic rally. And I want to thank again for all the speakers and all of you attending in person. And I know many of you have traveled long and had a really early start as well. But I also want to thank I also want to thank the many that are watching us online. We have really missed you, and we hope to be in person with you for the next event. We also want to thank all the speakers in the workshop, all the chairs, the technical assistants, and all those who helped throughout the weekend to make this event possible. Particularly to all the branches and regions and Nation Wales, who promoted this event, selling tickets, and all the hard work that you have done behind the scenes. This event would not have been possible without you. And I want to thank again to all the donation and the pledges that we got so far. We have set a really bold target of raising £30,000, and I am happy to announce that with all the IOUs and the donation we received before the event in preparation for it, that we have a total of £38,860. But we will announce the final figure in the afternoon session tomorrow, as well as announcing it on our next week's The Socialist paper. Now, if you're not yet subscribed to the paper, what are you waiting for? You can subscribe to either our weekly paper or our monthly journal, Socialism Today, by going to a website, thesocialistparty.org.uk/subscribe. And for those of you in the room, you can get a slip, a form to fill in at the Socialist Party store. Now, we are confident that we got the ideas and the program and a party to change the world for the socialist transformation of society. But we need something else. We need you. So if you agree with what you heard today and are not yet a member of the Socialist Party, join us today. But if you're not sure, then come along to the Socialist Party store tomorrow lunchtime, 1 to 2, to have a chat with us, or send in a join form, and then we can follow that up with more discussion with you if you're watching us tonight. Now, lucky for us, today is not the end of the discussion. For those here in person or live in London, we will be gathering for a post-rally drink at the Draper's Bar and Kitchen. I'm sure comrades around will take you there. But I've also been told that as well as drinks, there also food can be purchased there as well. So all welcome and invited. But obviously don't stay out too late because we got an early start tomorrow. Although it's 11, so it's not too bad. Now, Socialism 2021. So tomorrow we would have 20 workshops that you can choose from. One that starts from 11 to 1 and the other 2 to 4. But some of those sessions will be on Zoom only, so do check before you travel alone. And I think they're marked purple in your the program that you received today, or white on the online version. Anyway, you'll see it. It's obvious. Now, very finally, we finished the rally in our traditional way with the singing of the Internationale, a song which is known to be sung in at least 95 different languages and represent socialist internationalism. I think all of you would be given a leaflet here today that says the history of the Internationale, so something for you to read as well. So I'm now going to ask one of our singers, Rob Williams from the Industrial Department, to come to the stage to lead the singing of a song about working class unity against the bosses and capitalists. So we can ask everyone to stand up